Welcome to the Victorian garden where everything's gorgeous, fragrant and casually trying to kill you. The Victorians grew poison like it was poetry, then drank it, wore it, and called it self-care. Let's take a stroll through history's prettiest death trap. If you enjoy drifting off to tales of botanical betrayal and history's worst garden decisions, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more cozy chaos. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, because it's comforting to know we're all dodging deadly daisies together. Now dim the lights, get cozy, and step into a world where perfume could poison you. Tea was a gamble, and every bloom came with a body count. You've decided your eyes aren't nearly tragic enough. You want depth, you want mystery, you want the kind of eyes that make eligible bachelors drop their monocles. And what better way to achieve this than by squeezing a drop of poison directly into your corneas? Your maid, clearly just as unhinged as you, approaches with the dropper. "Just a little belladonna, miss," she chirps, as if she isn't wielding a neurotoxin like it's rosewater. You tip your head back, one drop in each eye. Blink. The world immediately starts to feel distant, soft, and vaguely menacing. You smile. It hurts. Probably because your pupils are now the size of shillings and your optic nerves are writing strongly worded letters to the Queen. You look absolutely ravishing. Also, absolutely poisoned. This was the Victorian ideal, beauty laced with death. Atropa belladonna, known as deadly nightshade, was the ultimate Gothic garden staple. Its black berries gleamed like jewels, its foliage was lush and dramatic, and its history was soaked in folklore and fascination. It was grown in ornamental borders, prized for its moody aesthetic and dangerous allure. But for some, it wasn't just a visual flourish, it was a tool, a sedative, a cosmetic, and occasionally an unintentional farewell note. Women used belladonna juice to dilate their pupils, believing it gave them that soft, romantic, on the brink of fainting charm. Doctors, in slightly more reasonable doses, used extracts in early sedatives or to calm muscle spasms. But belladonna doesn't forgive casual relationships. One misstep and the user found themselves not more alluring, but more horizontal. Take the case of a 6-year-old boy in 1872. While playing near his family's garden, he picked a handful of shiny black berries and ate them, thinking they were wild cherries. Within the hour, he was hallucinating, paralyzed and unresponsive. The local physician recognized the symptoms but could do little. The child died that evening. The incident made the local paper, accompanied by a warning that belladonna should not be cultivated within reach of children or fools. It wasn't an isolated tragedy. Belladonna berries were sweet and appealing, and their resemblance to fruit made them a frequent cause of accidental poisonings, especially among the young and the curious. Even a single berry could kill a child, 2 or 3 for an adult, depending on luck and liver function. The Victorians knew the risks, and still, they grew it. They saw something noble in the balance between elegance and danger. It was the botanical equivalent of fainting on purpose at a dinner party, and doing it gracefully. But beauty wasn't the only killer lurking in the flower beds. Just a few paces deeper into the garden stands a taller plant, its purple bells bobbing politely in the breeze, less subtle, more theatrical, and just as capable of sending you to the hereafter. Let's take a closer look at foxglove. Just maybe don't drink it. You wake up pale, not romantic Victorian heroine pale, more like left out in the cellar too long pale, and in a world where health and beauty are indistinguishable, and occasionally fatal, you decide it's time to act. No more being mistaken for an undercooked crumpet. You need colour, life. A touch of glow that says, "I'm absolutely not dying, even if you might be." That's when you remember Great Aunt Eugenia's advice. For a healthy flush, nothing beats a foxglove tisane, cured your uncle's palpitations and gave him excellent cheekbones. You overlook the fact that Uncle Theodore also spontaneously died during a church picnic. You head to the garden. The foxglove stands tall, proud, majestic, and waving its purple bells like it's happy to help with your cardiac ambitions. You pluck a few leaves, toss them into boiling water, and steep them with the confidence of someone who has absolutely no business preparing herbal medicine. You sip. It's bitter. Very bitter. You power through. After the 3rd mouthful, your cheeks tingle. Your heart skips, then dances, then possibly forgets the choreography altogether. You stand up. The room tilts. Your complexion has indeed changed, though you're now unsure if it's a glow or early signs of internal failure. Still you're upright, which in this era counts as wellness. Foxglove, or Digitalis purpurea, was beloved in Victorian gardens for its striking architectural presence. It added height, drama, and just the right amount of implied danger to cottage beds and formal borders. And while it had medicinal value, it was used to treat heart failure and dropsy, it also had an unfortunate tendency to treat you straight into the afterlife. The active ingredient digitalis could regulate the heartbeat, if you got the dosage right. The problem is, nobody ever really did. The therapeutic window was so narrow you could practically use it as a bookmark. A little too much and your heart wouldn't just beat, it would tap out a farewell note and leave. One widely reported case in the 1870s involved a woman who brewed what she thought was a spring tonic, using foraged leaves from her garden. She served it to herself and a visiting neighbour. Unfortunately, the plant wasn't comfrey as she believed. It was foxglove. The neighbour collapsed mid-sentence. The woman survived, barely. The newspaper called it a cautionary tale of botanical ambition. The neighbourhood called it Tuesday. Still, Victorians couldn't resist its allure. It was so common that it sometimes appeared in homemade skincare pastes, applied topically for that flushed and firm look. Naturally, this also caused nausea, fainting, and in more than one case hallucinating that Queen Victoria was asking for a dance. Foxglove flourished in dappled shade and moist soil, and receded like it was planning a quiet invasion. Gardeners loved it. Doctors feared it. Coroners got suspicious when it appeared in the home of someone with an inconveniently timed inheritance. And yet, despite its risks, foxglove remained a staple. Because if you were going to collapse in a garden chair, at least you'd do it beside something beautiful. You stagger upright, one hand over your heart, and blink toward the next garden bed. Something shimmering there in an almost electric shade of blue. It looks taller, wilder, less medicinal, more murderous. Monkshood, they call it. Because even flowers enjoy a bit of irony. You've decided to become a healer. Not a proper one with credentials. Good heavens, no. You're going for the old-fashioned kind. Cottagecore meets mild delusion. You've acquired a mortar and pestle, a book titled Herbal Lore for the Discreet Lady, and a garden full of questionable ideas. Today's experiment? Something for headaches, bad nerves, and troublesome suitors. You flip to a page marked aconite and read the following. Useful in small doses, in large doses, less so. You ignore that second part, it sounds optional. In the garden, monkshood stands like a royal guard. Tall, blue, dramatic, and absolutely pulsing with menace. You pluck a few petals, toss them into your pestle, and begin grinding with the self-assurance of someone who once made decent scones and thinks that qualifies them to extract alkaloids. You brew it into a little tincture. It smells like something that would file a complaint if it could. You take one sip, one tiny, curious sip. Your lips tingle. Your fingertips go cold. You begin to feel either very enlightened or very close to meeting the ghost of your grandmother. And somewhere in the back of your increasingly numbing mind, you recall that aconite is also known as the Queen of Poisons. A fact that, in hindsight, might have been worth considering before steeping it in your breakfast tea. Monkshood, Aconitum napellus, was one of the Victorian garden's most beautiful death traps. Its hooded blue flowers looked like little helmets, or veiled monks, hence the name. Dramatic and architectural, it added height and gravitas to garden beds, often standing tall at the back like a quiet aristocrat with a criminal past. But monkshood wasn't a casual plant. It was, and still is, extremely toxic. Even touching it with bare skin could cause tingling, numbness, or burning. Ingesting it, that was often fatal. The symptoms arrived fast and impressively. Numb mouth, vomiting, slowed heartbeat, and respiratory failure. The poison, aconitine, affects the nervous system, paralysing it from the outside in. In one well-known Victorian case, a woman died after taking what she believed to be an herbal nerve tonic prepared by a friend. The tonic, made from leaves gathered in the garden, contained monkshood. She fell ill within minutes. Witnesses described her as calm but increasingly pale, which is frankly the most terrifying way to die. Her friend, it turned out, had mistaken the plant for horseradish. That dinner party was never spoken of again. Still, monkshood was common in ornamental borders, particularly in cottage gardens and wilderness plantings. It thrived in cool climates and well-drained soil, and it was often used to attract attention from a safe distance. Just not too close. Gloves were recommended, labels were often forgotten. and gardeners with poor eyesight were advised to simply enjoy from the path. Despite its lethal potential, monkshood also had a role in folk remedies, though these recipes usually came with a whispered warning or a priest. It was said to treat everything from fever to facial pain, though given its effects the pain may have simply lost interest and left. You drop your little bottle of homemade tincture into the nearest bush, quietly vow never to dabble in healing again, and drift further along the path, slightly weak in the knees but wiser for it. Just ahead, something feathery and innocent catches your eye. It looks like parsley. Or is it Queen Anne's lace? Let's hope it's neither. It's hemlock. And it's not here to be helpful. You've recently taken up foraging. It's fashionable, natural, very rustic poetry with a side of dysentery. You've got a basket, a bonnet, and an unwavering belief that Mother Nature would never lead you astray. You spot it near the edge of the garden path. Delicate white flowers, lacy leaves. Looks a bit like parsley. Or maybe Queen Anne's lace. Or possibly something you read about once and promptly forgot. Either way, you pluck a handful, nibble a sprig, and feel very connected to the earth. Earthy, grounded, slightly tingly in your legs. A few minutes later, you realise you can no longer wiggle your toes, or stand, or form full sentences without drooling. You lie in the grass, smiling beatifically while your nervous system files for early retirement. Your final thought before everything fades is that the basket was cute at least. Hemlock Conium maculatum was the most polite plant to ever kill someone. It didn't scream, it didn't burn, it didn't even taste bad. It simply shut you down, quietly and efficiently. The poison, conine, is a neurotoxin that blocks communication between the nerves and muscles, leading to gradual paralysis. You remain fully conscious while your body forgets how to function. It's dignified. It's horrible. Most famous, of course, for killing Socrates in ancient Athens, hemlock didn't retire in the classical age. Victorians grew it in gardens, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose, because it looked decorative and natural. With its fine, feathery leaves and umbrella-like blooms, it blended easily into cottage-style plantings. Unfortunately, it also blended in with parsley and wild carrots, which made it a constant hazard for the overconfident cook. One well-documented incident in 1881 involved a young servant girl in Kent who gathered what she thought were edible herbs to flavour a stew. The family dog licked the spoon and promptly died. The humans followed, slower and more dramatically. By the time the local surgeon arrived, 2 family members were already paralysed and gasping. The survivor described a sense of peaceful sinking, right before the coroner described it as criminal negligence in horticultural identification. Hemlock thrived in poor soil and damp areas, often self-seeding in ditches, garden edges and meadows. Victorian gardeners sometimes didn't recognise it, or did and assumed a little wouldn't hurt. It did. The plant's tall, hollow stems were sometimes even used as makeshift whistles or pea shooters by children, which is probably the darkest possible version of outdoor play. Despite its dangers, hemlock remained in the botanical lexicon of the 19th century, occasionally showing up in folk medicine texts with a very clear, do not try this at home vibe. It may have looked gentle, but it was as unforgiving as a missed inheritance clause. You pull yourself upright, weak-limbed and horrified, brushing white petals from your coat with trembling fingers. Just ahead, the path turns darker, twisting into a night-blooming corner of the garden where the air smells strange and sweet. The flowers are trumpet-shaped, wide-mouthed, and unnervingly theatrical. Datura, they call it, or devil's trumpet, and it's about to blow a very different kind of tune. It's well past midnight, and sleep has decided you're not worth its time. You've tried everything. Lavender sachets, warm milk, reading The Trials of the Dowager Countess of Wiltingshire, a gripping 700-page epic in which absolutely nothing happens. But alas, your eyes remain defiantly open, and your thoughts are now composing waltzes using only the sound of your own heartbeat and the phrase, "What if I never sleep again?" Then you remember the plant. It's in the conservatory, sulking in a decorative pot, massive white trumpets curling at the edges like they're about to announce something dangerous. Your cousin Edgar gave it to you after his return from South America, along with an unwashed poncho, a bite mark on his arm, and a vague warning, don't drink it unless you're absolutely sure you want to see the other side. Well, you're sure. You're very tired. And honestly, the other side sounds peaceful. You pluck a petal, just one, and brew it gently into what you optimistically call tea, and what your maid later describes to the coroner as more of a potion, really. You sip. It's floral, a little bitter, not entirely unpleasant. You light a candle, then immediately forget what a candle is. You blink at the flame, which now has 4 heads, and appears to be whispering insults. The room melts slightly. Your dressing gown tries to strangle you. Your chair offers to take you on a journey. The grandfather clock sobs openly, and you forgive it because you too are full of regret and ticking noises. This, you now understand, is not sleep. This is datura, often called devil's trumpet, and with good reason. Datura stramonium was the Victorian garden's psychedelic party guest. Exotic, seductive, and guaranteed to ruin your evening. Its massive trumpet-shaped flowers were showstoppers, blooming at night with a fragrance both intoxicating and slightly sinister. Ideal for moonlit strolls, less ideal when ingested. Every part of the plant is toxic, leaves, seeds, flowers, even the roots. It contains powerful tropane alkaloids like scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamin, all of which interfere with neurotransmitters and plunge you into a vivid waking nightmare. For those chasing dreams or natural medicine, datura offered the possibility of mystical visions and the very real likelihood of full-blown delirium, violent hallucinations, coma, or death. And yet the Victorians grew it. Proudly. They admired its exotic appearance, its romantic habit of blooming at dusk, and the way it filled the air with perfume just before things got really weird. There are many recorded incidents of accidental and intentional datura poisonings, but one of the more memorable occurred in 1874. A gentleman in Devon, having heard rumours of the plant's curative power, brewed it as a tea to cure toothache. His servant later found him in the garden at dawn, weeping into a wheelbarrow and insisting he was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He died several hours later, convinced he'd been turned into a pigeon. Despite that, datura retained a place in fashionable gardens, especially for those with an interest in the exotic or mildly occult. It was occasionally smoked, either as part of ritualistic practice or just because someone was very bad at making decisions. The hallucinations were said to be long-lasting, immersive, and deeply unsettling. People saw angels. People saw monsters. People saw the inside of a coffin eventually. Growing datura was easy. It loved sun, heat, and being left alone. It could get impressively large, looming over walkways like a narcotic guardian spirit. Children were told to keep away from it. Adults were told to admire it with their eyes and not their teacups. At least that was the idea. You, of course, did not follow that idea. You now find yourself lying sideways on your fainting couch, wrapped in a curtain, holding a shoe you've renamed Gerald. The walls are breathing, your vision is upside down and in French. You vow never to trust anything trumpet-shaped again. And just as you begin to return to this plane of existence, you spot something further along the garden path. Bold, leafy, and magnificently ornamental. A plant with starburst foliage, dramatic red stems, and seed pods that look suspiciously like candy. You're too tired to scream, but your soul does a small internal wail. It's the castor bean plant. And it does not play. You've decided to make your own medicine, because why trust a licensed professional when you have a spoon, a saucepan, and the ironclad confidence of someone who once read a recipe for cough syrup and thought, I could do better? Today's project. Castor oil. The Victorians swore by it, for digestion, for hair growth, for punishing children who sneezed too dramatically. And you, clearly, are ready to join the tradition. You venture into the garden, where the castor bean plant looms like a tropical aristocrat. Its leaves are massive, shiny, star-shaped, and very confident in their aesthetic. The seed pods are red and spiky, like candy wrapped by someone with unresolved issues. You harvest a handful because you assume that if it comes from a plant and sounds vaguely familiar, it's probably safe to heat up and rub on your face. You smash the beans with a mortar, you boil them, you strain them into a dainty glass bottle labelled Wellness Elixir in your best calligraphy. You're halfway through applying it to your scalp when your maid walks in, gasps, and says, "Oh no, not the beans." Because here's the thing, they're not just any beans, they're the beans, the castor beans, the ones that contain ricin, one of the most violently toxic substances known to Victorian science. One bean, improperly processed, can kill an adult. Several, that's basically a politely floral death sentence. And what did you do? You made a spa treatment out of it. In its safe, processed form, castor oil was used all the time in the 19th century, as a purgative, a hair tonic, and an aggressive apology for whatever you did to deserve it. But the seeds themselves? Dangerous. You don't cold press your way past ricin. You don't infuse it. You don't steep it gently and hope for the best. You leave it alone and let the professionals do the boiling while wearing gloves and second thoughts. But of course, there were always overachievers. One well-known incident in the 1860s involved a housemaid who crushed several raw seeds and mixed them into a poultice for her employer's aching joints. The lady of the house died mid-application, reportedly mid-sentence, while declaring, "I feel," rather in vigour. The coroner, struggling for something polite, called it an unfortunate botanical misunderstanding. The maid was sacked. The joints remained sore, and the garden became just a little quieter. The castor bean plant was fashionable nonetheless. Its tropical foliage made it a centerpiece in ornamental beds and greenhouse displays. It grew fast, looked expensive, and gave the impression that you'd travelled somewhere far more interesting than Bournemouth. Victorian gardening guides often praised it as impressive. They did not, however, recommend chewing on it. You now sit very still in the parlour, your scalp tingling and your pulse slightly accusatory. The bottle of homemade oil has been removed, the spoon has been burned, and your maid is giving you the kind of a look usually reserved for people who lick the wallpaper. You promise yourself you'll only grow safe flowers from now on. Gentle things, pretty, fragrant, innocent, which is when you spot them. White bells, delicate and lovely, nodding in the shade near the fountain. Lily of the valley. You've seen them in wedding bouquets, in perfumes, in poetry. Surely this one can't possibly kill you. Ah, that's adorable. Let's continue. You've decided today is about elegance. No more wild potions, no more crushing seeds like a back-alley alchemist. You want refinement, sophistication, something a duchess might dab behind her ears while judging people from a balcony. So naturally you head for the garden's most innocent-looking corner, the lily of the valley bed. The air is heavy with sweetness. The tiny white bells dangle in perfect rows like dainty church ladies who've just heard a juicy rumour. It smells divine. You breathe deeply, you gather armfuls, you crush a few into a muslin cloth and rub it along your wrists, your neck, and, in a moment of frankly unnecessary enthusiasm, your upper lip. You feel glamorous. You feel poetic. You also, very suddenly, feel dizzy. You sit. The lilies nod at you with what now seems like smug malice. You are sweating. Your heart is experimenting. You try to stand, but your legs feel like jelly left in the sun. Somewhere in your chest, your cardiovascular system files a formal complaint. And just before you pass out gracefully into a hedge, you recall that someone once told you these were toxic. Lily of the Valley, Convallaria marjalis, was the Victorian symbol of purity, love, and gentle femininity, which is hilarious, because it could kill you faster than a jealous suitor with a pistol and a poor aim. Every part of the plant is toxic, from its roots to its delicate bell-shaped flowers. The culprit, cardiac glycosides, compounds that interfere with heart function in bold and unapologetic ways. Despite this, Victorians adored it. It was used in bridal bouquets, funeral wreaths, and sachets for drawers. Gardeners planted it liberally, especially in shady corners where little else would grow. It spread fast, smelled lovely, and was small enough to look harmless. But harmless it was not. One memorable Victorian incident occurred during a spring garden party in Sussex. A young woman wore a crown of fresh lily of the valley, because of course she did. After several hours of wearing the blooms in the sun, she began to feel faint. A physician was summoned, only to discover she had also been sipping a cordial infused with lily petals for aroma. She recovered, eventually, but not before insisting she could hear her heart clapping. The coroner later clarified, unnecessarily, that the plant should not be steeped, consumed, worn, or even admired too aggressively. The effects of lily of the valley poisoning range from nausea and dizziness to irregular heartbeat, and in larger doses cardiac arrest. And the danger isn't only in eating it. Handling it excessively or using it to perfume linens could still deliver small but cumulative doses of toxins through the skin. And yet, there it was, in nearly every Victorian garden, slipping beneath hedges and climbing up the legs of benches like an assassin in a ball gown. Perfume makers used it in small, carefully processed doses. Housewives used it in home fresheners. Brides walked down the aisle holding floral time bombs, You now lie sprawled on your fainting settee, fanned by your maid and muttering something about bells and betrayal. You've survived again. But only just. And as you're regaining your composure, you hear a soft moo in the distance. Because the next plant didn't need to be worn or sniffed. It only needed to be eaten by a cow. Let's talk about white snakeroot, the plant that poisoned milk, and indirectly, mothers. You've become deeply committed to natural health. No more store-bought tonics, no more questionable oils. You've taken up dairy, fresh, wholesome, straight from the cow. Why trust anything from a bottle when there's a jug of creamy, unpasteurized purity delivered each morning by a local farmer who calls everyone lass and wears one boot? This morning's milk looks especially divine. You drink it warm, you sip slowly, you pat yourself on the back for being one with nature, you make it halfway through your second glass before your stomach politely but firmly turns in its resignation letter. Your limbs feel heavy, your skin is clammy, your brain begins composing a will. You stagger to the sofa, flopping like a fainting goat in a bonnet. The world goes dim. It wasn't the milk. Well, it was, but not the milk. It was what the cow had for lunch. White snakeroot, Ageratina altissima, was not typically planted in Victorian gardens on purpose. It grew wild, often around fence lines, pastures and uncultivated plots. It had a fluffy, innocent appearance, with clusters of tiny white flowers that looked like they were there to cheer you up after a bad day. What they were actually doing was preparing to kill you, slowly, through a cow. This charming weed contains trematol, a toxin that passes directly into the milk of any grazing livestock that eats it. That milk, in turn, passes the poison into the unsuspecting tea drinkers and porridge eaters of the household. Symptoms included vomiting, tremors, delirium and organ failure. The name milk sickness was coined to describe it, and in the early 1800s, no one knew what caused it. One of its most infamous victims, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, mother of a boy who would grow up to become President of the United States. She died of milk sickness in 1818, long before anyone realized the culprit was a fluffy-looking plant growing in the woods beside the cow pasture. Countless settlers across the Midwest met the same fate. In some towns, entire families perished after unknowingly consuming tainted milk, butter or meat. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that a frontier woman named Anna Bixby, trained in herbal medicine, traced the illness back to white snakeroot with the help of a Shawnee woman. But even after the discovery, the warning spread slowly because people trusted cows, and the cows trusted leaves, and the leaves, well, they didn't really care. So no, it wasn't the milk, it was the cow's poor lunch choices, which became your breakfast, which nearly became your obituary. You rise slowly from your fainting couch, vowing to speak with the milkman about pasture boundaries and perhaps invest in a goat. And just as you steady yourself with a teacup full of anything but milk, you notice something blooming along the garden path. Bright, beautiful flowers, red, pink, white, lush and evergreen, popular as hedges, popular at funerals too, if we're being honest. Oleander, the plant that kills with flair. You've planned a picnic, you've got everything. Fresh bread, a jar of jam, cold chicken, a flask of elderflower cordial, and a rustic charm that says, "I pretend to enjoy the outdoors." You've chosen the perfect shady spot by the garden hedge beneath a blooming oleander bush. Its flowers are stunning, pink and white and practically humming with elegance. You feel like a painting, possibly even a poem. You realise you've forgotten skewers, but not to worry. You snap a few sturdy twigs from the hedge behind you. They're straight, strong, and conveniently pointy. Perfect for roasting sausages. The meal is delightful until it isn't. A few bites in, you notice your throat feels dry. Then your vision starts to pulse. You blink. The sausage begins reciting Byron. The grass begins tilting. You're sweating like you just remembered your debts. Your heart decides it's no longer interested in your future. You tip sideways onto the picnic blanket, your hat sliding dramatically over one eye. And just before unconsciousness sets in, you whisper your last coherent thought, "I regret the twigs." Oleander, Nerium oleander, was one of the most visually celebrated shrubs of the Victorian garden. Evergreen, exuberant and perfectly trimmed into hedges, it offered beauty, privacy, and just enough murder potential to keep things interesting. Its flowers were lush and seductive, and its leaves stayed green even in poor soil and heat. It was, in short, the dream shrub. Also, every part of it was poisonous. Leaves, flowers, stems, sap, everything. The plant contains cardiac glycosides, similar to foxglove, which can interfere with heart rhythms, digestion, and your ability to remain alive. Symptoms of poisoning include nausea, vomiting, slowed pulse, irregular heartbeat, vision problems, and, should you be unlucky or overly confident with your roasting sticks, death. And yes, the roasting stick mistake is not hypothetical. Several incidents were recorded during the Victorian period involving picnic goers who used oleander twigs to cook meat, believing them to be ordinary garden branches. In one notable case, a family fell ill shortly after a garden feast. The father survived. The guest did not. The hedge presumably remained smug. Despite its lethality, oleander was a staple of both estate gardens and public parks. Victorians loved it for its low maintenance and its dramatic flair. It was often planted in rows along fences or garden edges, right where children might wander and animals might nibble. Some households even brought clippings indoors for display in vases, because if there's one thing Victorians loved, it was decorative risk. In smaller doses, exposure might only cause discomfort, a rash, a headache, an inconvenient episode of heart palpitations. In larger doses, however, it worked quickly and efficiently. There were whispers of intentional poisonings too, quiet rumours in the margins of inquests. After all, what better weapon than a flowering hedge no one suspected? You now lie on the picnic blanket like a fallen debutante, one shoe off, your jam pot tragically overturned. You're not dead, but you're not entirely convinced you're still functioning either. The oleander hedge rustles in the breeze, innocent as a fox in lace gloves. You vow never to picnic again. As you stagger to your feet, brushing crumbs off your skirt and trying to remember your own name, you spot a tree at the far end of the garden path. Cascading yellow blossoms shimmer in the sun, dangling like golden jewellery from twisted branches. Children love it. Children shouldn't. It's Laburnum, the golden chain tree, and it has very strong opinions about snack time. You're hosting a tea party for the neighbourhood children. You've got sugar biscuits, lemonade, a butterfly net, and 7 children dressed like cherubs with criminal tendencies. They've already pulled apart 2 lace doilies and are now arguing over who gets the biggest scone. You smile, gracious and maternal, as one child asks if they can explore the garden. Of course, you say. Go play by the golden tree, it's so cheerful. Cheerful indeed. The tree is in full bloom, cascading chains of yellow blossoms draping from its branches like liquid sunshine. The children squeal with delight. One climbs up. Another starts collecting the shiny brown pods that hang below. They look just like peas. You see a handful go into someone's mouth. You lunge, and it's too late. 2 minutes later, one child is hiccuping rhythmically, another has gone unnervingly silent, and the smallest one is singing a French lullaby in reverse. You're fairly certain none of them actually know French. This is going to be difficult to explain to their parents. Laburnum anagyroides, more whimsically known as the golden chain tree, was a beloved Victorian garden ornament, graceful, dazzling, and deeply untrustworthy. Its flowers were a showstopper each spring, and many a romantic stroll or outdoor portrait featured its drooping gold clusters. But behind the sparkle lurked a very Victorian twist. If it was pretty, it might kill you. The entire plant is toxic, but it's the seeds that are the real menace. Encased in smooth, dark pods that look almost exactly like edible peas, they contain cytisine, a chemical cousin of nicotine. In small doses, cytisine causes nausea, sweating, and an upset stomach. In larger doses, it produces tremors, confusion, seizures, and respiratory failure. Victorian newspapers occasionally printed small notices about children who had fallen ill after foraging near the laburnum. That's code for someone made a snack out of decorative landscaping. One reported case involved 3 children in Lancashire who ingested laburnum seeds after a Sunday school picnic. The article described them as having a sudden and curious silence, followed by vomiting most unladylike in manner. All 3 survived, but only because the family doctor recognised the symptoms in time, and because, as he later said, they hadn't eaten many peas. And yet, laburnum was a garden staple. It flourished in poor soil, tolerated shade, and looked expensive. The Victorians prized its weeping shape and luminous blooms. Some gardeners even trained it into archways and tunnels, perfect for bridal photos and botanical sabotage. Instructions for care usually included warnings about its seeds, but these were printed in very small font and read by very few people, usually after someone had to be forcibly separated from a handful of decorative legumes. Now the children are groaning softly in the parlour, a few of them clutching pillows and muttering in rhymes. You're dabbing their foreheads with cold cloths, and wondering if perhaps hedge mazes and decorative ponds weren't the greatest idea either. You swear on every doily that survived this event that you will never again let children near anything that blooms. Which brings us to the plant just beyond the hedge, towering, trumpet-shaped, intensely fragrant at night, and favoured by people with a flair for drama and a complete lack of fear. Angel's trumpet. Irony has never smelled so good. You've decided to paint. Something soulful, ethereal, the kind of artwork that makes guests sigh wistfully and say things like, "She's so sensitive," or "Is that a duck?" or... Either way, you require inspiration, so you gather your sketchbook and sit beneath the angel's trumpet tree, where the enormous blooms hang like upside-down chandeliers designed by a theatrical ghost. They sway gently in the breeze. The fragrance is intoxicating, literally, and you find yourself inhaling deeply, eyes half-lidded, wondering if perhaps you were born to suffer beautifully. You begin sketching. 15 minutes later, your pencil has wandered off the page, your socks are on your hands, and you're humming an improvised opera about pigeons. A bee floats past and you curtsy. The tree above you is whispering in German, and you understand every word. This is the greatest painting you've never made. This is also the beginning of your downfall. Brugmansia, or Angel's Trumpet, was the Victorian garden's grand illusionist. With its huge, pendulous blossoms and lush leaves, it was the showstopper of moonlit gardens and conservatories. It smelled divine, particularly in the evening when the flowers released their scent like a perfume salesman with boundary issues. But underneath that heady charm, a plant laced with danger. Angel's Trumpet contains the same cocktail of alkaloids found in datura, scopolamine, atropine, hyoscyamine, and produces many of the same symptoms: hallucinations, confusion, dry mouth, elevated heart rate, coma, and the potential for death. And unlike some poisonous plants that demand to be eaten or brewed, Brugmansia only requires you to breathe deeply and make poor choices. In Victorian circles, it was often grown in moon gardens, spaces designed to bloom and glow under silver light, ideal for romantic strolls and accidental intoxication. Gardeners praised its fragrance and visual drama, and artists, the artists, absolutely flocked to it. One particularly regrettable incident involved a gentleman painter who fell asleep under a Brugmansia during a garden party, and later woke up 2 counties away wearing someone else's shoes and insisting he'd had tea with Napoleon. He was returned home safely, but not before trying to marry a street lamp. Despite such risks, Angel's Trumpet was immensely popular. It thrived in pots and borders, especially in sheltered spaces that trapped its perfume. Guests swooned, hosts bragged, physicians quietly circled nearby. Brugmansia wasn't native to England, of course. It hailed from warmer climates, and so its presence in a Victorian garden signalled wealth, taste, and just enough botanical recklessness to keep the neighbours intrigued. As you lie beneath the tree, still wearing your socks on your hands and addressing your paintbrush as Your Majesty, your maid appears with that look that means, not again. You're escorted indoors. The drawing you started now resembles a haunted turnip. You feel dizzy, elated, and entirely unsure of your name. You vow to paint flowers from memory from now on. As the evening air cools and the scent of the trumpets fades, you spot something blooming further along the garden edge. Small, delicate petals pushing up from the earth in soft lilac hues. So subtle, so charming, so edible looking. It's the autumn crocus. And by tomorrow morning, it might also be the reason you no longer need a wake-up call. You've taken up foraging. It's fashionable now. Wholesome, rustic, and more importantly, free. Armed with a straw basket and an exaggerated sense of competence, you march into the far end of the garden muttering phrases like, "Nature provides," and "I read one book on this once." You spot the perfect patch of edible delight. Delicate purple flowers blooming proudly amid the fallen leaves. "Wild garlic," you say aloud to no one. "Possibly onions." You pluck a handful with the confidence of a woman who recently mistook parsley for hemlock and lived to tell the tale. You saute the bulbs. You add a touch of butter. You declare it farm to table and serve it alongside toast. 3 bites in, your stomach does a slow theatrical flip. 5 bites in, your tongue feels like it's been cursed by a vengeful spirit. By bite 6, you're gripping the edge of the table and trying to remember your blood type, and somewhere in the back of your reeling mind a tiny voice whispers, "Those weren't onions." The autumn crocus, Colchicum autumnale, was the polite Victorian garden's silent killer. Its flowers, which bloom in the fall without any visible leaves, resemble edible crocuses or wild garlic, and were frequently mistaken for them by enthusiastic herbalists, lazy gardeners, and people who simply shouldn't have been allowed near plants unsupervised. The plant contains colchicine, a potent alkaloid that interferes with cell division, making it especially deadly. It doesn't kill you immediately, it's patient. It starts with gastrointestinal discomfort, then progresses to organ failure, and finally quiet resignation. One particularly grim Victorian tale involved a clergyman's wife who foraged what she believed to be edible crocus bulbs and made a modest stew. The family dog, after licking the pot, expired theatrically under the table. The clergyman himself took ill during Vespers. The wife, who ate the most, declared something tastes off just before collapsing. The coroner later declared the dish impeccably seasoned but tragically misidentified. Despite its lethality, autumn crocus was planted in gardens for its beauty. Its lilac blooms appeared just as everything else began to fade, bringing colour and softness to otherwise drab beds. It was seen as elegant, understated, and tragically edible-looking. Some physicians used colchicine medicinally to treat gout, but the dosage had to be precise. Anything more than a smidge, and the gout stopped bothering you because you were no longer among the living. You now lie curled on the floor of your conservatory, clutching your stomach and moaning dramatically. The basket of wild garlic is now being burned in the fireplace. Your maid is spooning milk of magnesia into your mouth with one hand and filling out an incident report with the other. You swear, between dry heaves, to never eat anything purple again. And just as you begin to recover your faculties, you glance out the window and spot a hedge, tall, dark, perfectly trimmed, and absolutely ancient. It surrounds the cemetery. Of course it does. It's English yew, and it's been waiting. You've taken a new job, voluntarily somehow, as a part-time graveyard gardener. It's peaceful, quiet, no one talks back. You've trimmed roses, swept mossy paths, and developed an intimate friendship with a crow named Harold. Today, while clipping hedges near the chapel, you pause beside a glorious specimen of English yew. It stands tall and brooding, its dark green needles dense and solemn, like it's been keeping secrets since the Norman conquest. You admire its symmetry, its elegance, its lovely little red berries. You pop one into your mouth. Harold the Crow flaps his wings in horror. The berry is sweet, pleasant. You spit out the seed, because you're not an animal, but within moments, your stomach turns cold. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts slow to a dignified crawl. You sit down next to a tombstone and quietly begin planning your own. This is what we call a poor landscaping decision. The English yew, Taxus baccata, was both guardian and executioner in the Victorian garden. It lined cemetery walls, loomed over churchyards, and offered a sense of stoic permanence to otherwise fleeting plots of land. It was beautiful, symbolic, and completely unforgiving. Every part of the yew is poisonous, except, ironically, the red berry's flesh. The seeds, however, are lethally toxic. The leaves, too. The wood. Also not advisable. It contains taxine alkaloids that interfere with cardiac function, often causing death through sudden heart failure. The effects can occur with alarming speed and very little drama. Just a brief moment of discomfort, followed by eternal silence. Fitting for a graveyard tree, really. One widely shared Victorian story involved a young boy who died after fashioning a whistle out of a yew twig. Because that's what you do when you live in the 19th century and everything is either a toy or a fatal botanical experiment. Another tale tells of mourners at a funeral who plucked yew berries absent-mindedly during the service, resulting in a second funeral only days later. Etiquette guides after that quietly advised guests to eat before you attend the interment. Despite this, yew remained beloved. It was symbolic of immortality, associated with ancient pagan rituals, and widely respected for its longevity. Some specimens in England are thousands of years old, older than the churches they stand beside. Gardeners shaped them into hedges, topiaries, and funeral arches. The Victorians adored anything with history, especially if that history included casual death. The plant was so steeped in folklore and quiet dread that it occasionally appeared in Gothic novels as a harbinger. If a yew tree shaded your path, something unfortunate was probably about to happen. You now lie draped across a crumbling tomb, whispering an apology to your stomach, the church, and possibly Harold. Your heart, thank heavens, has decided to keep going, though not without protest. You vow to stop snacking on anything you've trimmed with shears. As you rise, brushing moss from your coat, your eyes fall on a cluster of golden blossoms along the path. Cheerful, harmless-looking, practically begging to be picked. A buttercup. How sweet. How sunny. How suspicious. You've decided your face needs improving. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Just that it could be smoother, lighter, more symmetrical. Less, as your aunt once whispered, tired around the soul. You're aiming for luminous, ethereal. The kind of complexion that suggests wealth, innocence, and absolutely no fibre in your diet. So, naturally you turn to a trusted beauty remedy from Lady Whistledown's Handbook of Delicate Remedies, a poultice made of rhubarb leaves. The recipe is simple: mash the leaves, boil until swamp-like, and slather generously on your face while reciting something French. You follow the instructions to the letter. The paste smells like bitterness and danger. You apply it in thick globs, lie back with cucumber slices over your eyes, and wait for the transformation. 10 minutes in, your skin starts to itch. 15 minutes in, it burns. By the 20-minute mark, your eyebrows have fled, your upper lip has gone numb, and you're screaming for your maid to bring the butter and possibly a priest. Congratulations. You've made a face mask that doubles as a chemical weapon. While modern rhubarb is beloved for its tart stalks and pie-adjacent glory, the leaves of the plant contain oxalic acid, a compound that, in sufficient quantities, causes nausea, kidney failure, skin burns, and death. Victorians, in their ongoing quest for self-improvement via reckless horticulture, frequently forgot this detail. Rhubarb leaves were occasionally used in homemade remedies. Face creams, acne pastes, and purifying poultices meant to draw out blemishes and sins. The theory was that if your face tingled, the mask was working. In reality, the mask was just dissolving your pores. One beauty column from the 1870s even recommended simmering the leaves into a complexion tonic, though a later correction noted several women took ill while pursuing radiance. One particularly unfortunate socialite in Bath wore a rhubarb leaf mask for an hour, and was mistaken for a fresh burn victim at the dinner table. She was later seen attending parties with a veil, and possibly a vendetta. Of course, the stalks were perfectly safe, and still used in jellies, jams, and puddings. But the temptation to use the whole plant was strong, especially among those who believed natural meant harmless. It did not. Rhubarb thrived in Victorian kitchen gardens. It was hardy, low maintenance, and impressively productive. It grew beside lavender and sage, neither of which tried to murder you with skincare. The leaves were large and lush, and therefore frequently mistaken for useful. They were not. You now lie fanned on the parlour chaise, face red, eyebrows regretting their life choices, and the scent of boiled rhubarb clinging to your everything. Your maid is trying to scrub the paste off with lemon and tears. You vow to age naturally, or at least less aggressively. And just as you settle into this newfound self-acceptance, you peer out the window and spot something sweet, low, and golden blooming in the lawn. A buttercup. You smile. It's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. The air smells like grass and potential. You've had just the right number of biscuits and feel, for once, not in mortal peril. This calls for celebration. So you kick off your boots and decide to run barefoot through the meadow like you're in a watercolour painting. You haven't done this since childhood. You're feeling whimsical, free, romantic, practically illustrated. You dash into the wildflowers, golden blooms swaying in the breeze like little coins scattered by a careless god. You pick one, then another. You hold a buttercup under your chin and ask yourself if you like butter. Of course you like butter. You also like not developing mysterious blisters on your feet and neck within 10 minutes. Unfortunately, buttercups do not care about your preferences. They care about vengeance. Buttercups, members of the ranunculus family, were deceptively cheerful flowers found in nearly every Victorian lawn, pasture and meadow. Their bright yellow petals, cup-like and sunny, practically demanded to be picked. And they were, by children, poets, foragers, and anyone with a problematic relationship to footwear. But despite their charm, buttercups packed a botanical backhand. They contain ranunculin, a compound that, when crushed or damaged, converts into a skin-irritating substance called protoanemonin. It causes blisters, redness, and sometimes an itching that can only be described as punishment for joy. Victorians didn't always know this. One tragic little incident occurred during a Sunday school outing where children gathered armfuls of yellow delight and promptly broke out in rashes. The teacher, baffled, declared it a test of moral patience. The children, less philosophically inclined, spent the remainder of the picnic scratching, crying, and renouncing flowers altogether. And yet buttercups remained beloved. They grew without effort. They carpeted fields in golden abundance. They were the backdrop of thousands of romantic paintings, pastoral novels, and extremely itchy elbows. Occasionally the plants were used medicinally, but only in the kinds of folk recipes that also involved leeches and good intentions. Applied to the skin, they were said to treat arthritis or draw out infection. More often they just burned like nature's way of saying, "Stop it!" Farm animals weren't spared either. Livestock that grazed too heavily on buttercups could become sick. Blistered mouths, stomach distress, and a general air of betrayal. Even in hay, the dried plants lost some, but not all of their bite. You now sit in a patch of shade, ankles blotchy, chin red, and one hand still clutching a buttercup in disbelief. Your maid has brought out the aloe and your last functioning shoe. The meadow glows prettily in the sun like it hasn't just tried to ruin your afternoon. You sigh. Perhaps next time you'll just look at the flowers from the porch, maybe with a book, and gloves, definitely gloves. The garden rests now, dangerous yes, but quiet for the moment. Would you like some tea? It's probably safe. Probably. You've taken up interior decorating, specifically natural interior decorating. Wallpaper is fine, yes, but nothing says elegant countryside melancholy, like trailing ivy creeping across your mantelpiece and possibly into your furniture. So you head outside with scissors and a vision. There it is, English ivy, coiled romantically along the garden wall like it's hiding the secrets of a 300-year-old scandal. It's lush, it's moody. It says, "I belong in a painting where someone's fainting in a velvet chair." You trim several generous strands and bring them inside. You hang it around your mirror, you twine it around your bedposts, you drape it across your bookshelf. You may have also glued some to a decorative hat. You're deeply committed to the aesthetic. 6 hours later you are also deeply itchy. It starts on your wrist, an innocent tickle, then your neck, then your eyelid. Soon your entire décolletage is pink, puffy, and furious. You look in the mirror and see a stranger, someone who tried to live inside a pre-Raphaelite painting and ended up resembling an allergic Victorian tomato. Your maid walks in, stares at your blotchy neck and says, "Is that art?" No, it is not. It's botanical betrayal. English ivy, Hedera helix, was both revered and feared in Victorian times. Revered because it symbolised loyalty, eternity, and a sort of mossy nobility. Feared because it would gleefully destroy your house and your skin while looking absolutely fabulous doing it. It climbed garden walls, choked out weaker plants, and made every crumbling estate look like it had a brooding secret. The Victorians adored this. Ivy-clad architecture became shorthand for timeless beauty, deep history, and the distinct smell of mildew. But indoors, that's where things got spicy. People brought ivy into parlours, onto banisters, and into bedrooms, because what's more restful than a vine that may or may not be digesting your wallpaper? And while it made for dramatic decor, English ivy also produced tiny needle-like crystals called rhaphides. For some sensitive individuals, just touching the leaves or sap could cause contact dermatitis, rashes, or even blistering. One famously unfortunate Victorian socialite covered her dressing room mirror in ivy before a grand ball. By the time she emerged, her face had swollen to resemble a decorative footstool. The papers declared her fashionably flushed. She did not attend the ball. Beyond rashes, ivy was also mildly toxic when ingested, particularly for pets, children, and adults with adventurous appetites. Nausea, stomach cramps, and spontaneous regret were common symptoms. That didn't stop people from using it in folk remedies for everything from coughs to ulcers, because apparently itching wasn't enough of a deterrent. Gardeners, of course, still planted it everywhere. It grew in shade, poor soil, and neglect. 3 things Victorian gardens had in abundance. Left unchecked, it climbed walls, strangled trees, and occasionally tore masonry from buildings. It has character, one gardening manual said. It also had a body count. You now sit in the bathtub, submerged in calamine lotion, while your maid picks ivy fragments out of your hair and mutters about redecorating with bricks instead. The house smells faintly of regret and crushed leaves. You vow to use only dried flowers from now on, or plaster, or possibly nothing that grows ever again. But deep in the garden something glimmers. A berry, small, tempting, glossy. Have we met before? It's deadly nightshade. Oh, good. You've come full circle. You've decided to throw a garden soiree, something refined, something tasteful, something floral enough to suggest you read poetry, but not so floral that anyone expects you to do your own pruning. The centerpiece? Your signature drink, the Blush Bloom Tonic, a charming concoction of gin, elderflower cordial, tonic water, and a small handful of fresh hydrangea petals, because you read once that edible flowers are very fashionable. You serve it in crystal glasses with matching napkins. Guests adore it. You are radiant, sophisticated, possibly the toast of the season. Then a guest collapses face first into the shrimp aspic. Another clutches his throat and begins quoting Latin he doesn't know. A third simply turns green and calmly says, "I regret everything," before fainting into your peonies. You sip your own drink, smile politely, and feel your tongue go slightly numb. Perfect. Hydrangea macrophylla, was a Victorian favourite. Dramatic, round flower heads bursting with colour and charm. It adorned shade gardens, trellises, and the backgrounds of hundreds of moody oil portraits. Pink or blue, depending on soil acidity, it was seen as adaptable, romantic, and the perfect plant for anyone who wanted their flower beds to resemble a blushing opera singer. But like many things in Victorian society, it looked delicate and well-mannered, while quietly preparing to kill you. Hydrangea contains cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that, when metabolized, release cyanide. Yes, cyanide. The same substance found in rat poison and infamous spy capsules. The leaves, buds, and flowers all contain these compounds, though you'd need to ingest a fair bit to meet your maker, unless you've brewed it into a dainty, crowd-pleasing cocktail, in which case, bottoms up. There were whispers of hydrangea tea being used medicinally. Some claimed it cured kidney ailments or restless blood. Others, usually shortly before vomiting violently into their best hatbox, claimed it cleansed the spirit. Several documented Victorian poisonings occurred after people steeped the leaves for herbal remedies, unaware that natural does not mean non-lethal. In one particularly poetic case, a young woman created her own flower-based wellness elixir and offered it to house guests as a summer refresher. 3 of them ended up horizontal. One reportedly stood up mid-convulsion to compliment her teacups. The hostess, having consumed only a small amount, survived. The teacups tragically were chipped in the chaos. Despite this, hydrangea remained a staple of Victorian landscapes. It flourished in acidic soil, preferred partial shade, and spread politely without taking over, unlike ivy, which had no concept of boundaries. It also dried beautifully, which made it popular in arrangements, wreaths, and presumably passive-aggressive funereal centerpieces. You now lie on a garden chaise, fanned by 2 shaken guests and covered in linen napkins soaked in what may or may not be cyanide gin fizz. Your maid has hidden the punch bowl, the garnishes, and the guest list. The hydrangeas bob gently in the breeze, innocent as ever. You think perhaps you've had enough of gardening, enough of flowers, enough of herbal experiments, floral teas, leaf-based lotions, and bouquets that double as untraceable homicide weapons. The party winds down. Even the garden seems to quiet. Until... was that a rustle? No, surely not. Unless... have we checked the dahlias? They've always seemed a little too quiet. The garden never sleeps, and neither should you. Probably. In the end, the Victorian garden was less a sanctuary and more a politely manicured minefield, where beauty bloomed alongside blisters, hallucinations, heart failure, and the occasional well-dressed corpse. Every plant held a secret, the alluring berry that blurred your vision, the elegant blossom that sabotaged your pulse, the soothing tea that politely escorted you into the afterlife. These were not passive petals. They were assassins in bloomers, cloaked in fragrance and folklore, admired by poets and feared by physicians. And yet, the Victorians adored them, cultivated them, rubbed them on their faces, drank them, decorated their homes, and sometimes their funerals with them. Because in the age of lace, arsenic, and blind ambition, what mattered wasn't safety, it was style. And if the garden killed you, at least it did so romantically. And now, as the last petal droops and the garden settles beneath moonlight and memory, I hope this strange stroll through the deadly blooms of the Victorian era lingers, like the scent of lily on your skin or the mild panic of accidentally sipping poison tea. You've braved toxic tonics, hallucinogenic hedges, rash-inducing bouquets, and facial treatments that doubled as assassination attempts. But now it's time to rest. The blossoms are still, the hedges have stopped whispering, and for tonight the garden won't try to kill you. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've survived another evening in history's most charming death trap. Hit subscribe so we can dig up another strange corner of the past tomorrow night. And as you drift, the soft crackle of the fire will carry you deeper, far from the sting of belladonna and into sleep.